My family excluded me from vacation. He won't notice, and I changed. They thought I was oblivious, so I quietly unleashed a financial reckoning. The moment I watched my father-in-law Otis deflate like a punctured balloon on my doorstep, his face cycling through disbelief, indignation, and something I'd never seen before, genuine fear, as I calmly told him he wasn't welcome in my house, I knew something fundamental had shifted in the universe. Something that had been 25 years in the making, brewing beneath the surface of every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every time he'd made me feel like I wasn't quite good enough for his precious daughter, but took only 47 desperate text messages and one Instagram post to finally reveal. The great Otis, who'd spent 2.5 decades treating me like an adequate but unremarkable provider, was finally seeing the man behind the ATM, and he didn't like what he found. Let me paint you the full picture of how a family vacation I wasn't invited to became the most expensive mistake my wife and kids ever made, and how a man they thought was too boring to notice anything became someone they'll never underestimate again. The beautiful irony is that they were right about one thing: I am methodical. I do notice everything, and when I finally act, I don't just burn bridges, I redesign the entire landscape, restructure the power dynamics, and leave everyone involved with a crystal clear understanding of what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness and reliability for stupidity. You see, there's something people don't understand about the quiet, dependable type, the ones who show up every day without complaint, who fix things that break, who pay bills without drama, who absorb every slight and disappointment with a patient smile. We're not doormats, we're data collectors. Every dismissive comment gets cataloged, every eye roll gets filed away, every moment of being taken for granted gets stored in a mental database that would make the NSA jealous. And when we finally reach our limit, when the accumulated weight of years of casual disrespect finally tips the scales, we don't explode, we execute. We don't throw tantrums, we implement solutions. We don't make threats, we restructure reality. 3 weeks ago, sitting in my empty house at 3:27 a.m. on my 50th birthday, the silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming 3 rooms away, scrolling through Instagram photos of my entire family living their best lives at some five-star beach resort, while 47 increasingly frantic messages lit up my phone like a digital distress beacon. I experienced what I can only describe as a moment of perfect clarity. The kind of revelation that hits you like cold water, washing away years of self-doubt and misplaced guilt to reveal the truth underneath. 25 years of marriage, 2 kids I thought I'd raised with values and respect, a quarter-century of being the foundation everyone else built their dreams on. And this is what it amounted to: a family that planned elaborate, expensive vacations around excluding me because, and I quote directly from my son's Instagram caption, "He won't even notice we're gone, LOL." That LOL, those 3 letters carried more contempt than any insult they could have hurled at my face. It wasn't just dismissive, it was pitying, like I was some sad, predictable character in their family sitcom, too oblivious to even register as a real person with feelings and expectations. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that I was so checked out, so irrelevant to their emotional lives that they could orchestrate my exclusion from a major family event and I'd just not notice. Like I was furniture. Like I was wallpaper. Like I was anything except the man who'd worked 60-hour weeks for decades to make their comfortable lives possible. The setup for this masterpiece of family dysfunction started about 2 months before my birthday, when my wife Willow began acting like she was coordinating a black ops mission every time my 50th came up in conversation. The woman who usually couldn't keep a surprise gift hidden for more than 24 hours suddenly became a master of operational security. Secretive phone calls that ended the moment I walked into a room, laptop screens snapping shut with suspicious speed. Little conspiratorial smiles exchanged with our daughter Piper that made me think something wonderful was brewing behind the scenes. The irony is that Willow had never been good at keeping secrets from me. In 25 years of marriage, I'd figured out every birthday gift, every anniversary surprise, every Christmas present, just by reading her terrible poker face. She'd get this barely contained excitement, this little tremor in her voice when she was planning something special. So, when she maintained perfect operational security for 2 solid months, I should have realized something was fundamentally different about this particular secret. I should have understood that you only get that good at deception when you're hiding something you're genuinely ashamed of. Even my usually indifferent 23-year-old son Tomas started dropping hints, which should have been the biggest red flag of all. This is a kid who forgot my birthday 3 years running, who needed reminders to call on Father's Day, who generally treated family obligations like annoying interruptions to his social media career. Suddenly, he was asking pointed questions about my plans, making comments about how things were going to be different this year, giving me these knowing looks like we were sharing some great inside joke. I'll admit it, I got excited. Genuinely, embarrassingly excited in a way that now makes me cringe when I think about it. 50 felt like a milestone, one of those birthdays that deserves recognition. And while we're not wealthy people comfortable, but always aware of our limitations, living paycheck to paycheck despite my steady income, I thought maybe they'd planned something special. Maybe a surprise party with coworkers and extended family. Maybe a weekend getaway somewhere within driving distance. Something to acknowledge that half a century of showing up, providing, being the reliable foundation everyone else built their dreams on, meant something to the people who mattered most. The fantasy I built in my head during those 2 months of mounting anticipation was embarrassingly modest when I look back on it now. I pictured walking into our living room to find it decorated with those cheesy, over-the-hill banners, maybe some neighbors and friends from work. Definitely a cake from the grocery store bakery, because that's how we've always done birthdays, practical but heartfelt. I imagined Willow making a toast about how grateful she was for everything I'd provided. Tomas making some joke about my age that was actually affectionate rather than cutting. Piper giving me one of those handmade cards she used to make when she was little. It wasn't much to hope for, really. Just acknowledgement. Just visibility. Just some indication that the man who'd worked overtime to pay for Piper's college, who'd helped Tomas with his apartment down payment, who'd never missed a mortgage payment in 25 years, who'd chosen family stability over personal dreams at every crossroads, mattered enough to celebrate. I even requested the day off work, which in retrospect should have been my first clue that the universe was setting me up for the joke of a lifetime. I never take personal days, never. In 15 years at my current job, I'd used maybe a dozen sick days total, and most of those were when the kids needed me home. I showed up during blizzards, worked through migraines, came in on weekends without complaint. Taking a personal day for my birthday was so unprecedented that my boss actually asked if everything was okay, if there was some family emergency he should know about. But of course, life had other plans. At 6:15 a.m. on my birthday, while I was still in that drowsy space between sleep and waking, my phone rang with that particular urgency that meant work crisis. My boss, sounding harried and apologetic, explained that we had an emergency at the riverside, project a major water main break that needed immediate attention. Someone had to be there, someone who knew the system, someone reliable. I know it's your day off, he said, and I could hear the assumption in his voice that I'd say yes, because I always say yes, because that's who Norman is, the guy who shows up, who solves problems, who puts work before personal needs without being asked. But you're the only one who really knows that system inside and out. I could have said no. Should have said no. It was my 50th birthday. I'd specifically requested the day off. I had a family who was supposedly planning something special for me. But 25 years of being the reliable one, the guy who never lets the team down, kicked in automatically. I'll be there in an hour, I heard myself saying, already reaching for my work clothes. When I called Willow from the car to say I'd be late, but would definitely be home for dinner, she sounded almost relieved, distracted, like my absence was solving some problem I wasn't aware of. I spent my 50th birthday elbow deep in muddy water and broken pipes, with coworkers who didn't even know it was my birthday because I'm not the type to make a fuss. But I was genuinely looking forward to getting home, to whatever surprise was waiting, to finally being celebrated by the people who mattered most. I even stopped at the liquor store and bought a bottle of the good whiskey, the expensive stuff I usually only look at but never buy because there's always something more important to spend money on. At 5:53 p.m., I pulled into my driveway to find no extra cars, no signs of preparation, just an empty house sitting in gathering darkness like a stage set for a play I wasn't invited to perform in. Inside, the silence was deafening. No decorations, no cake, no family, no note explaining where everyone had vanished to. I called Willow straight to voicemail, called Tomas, same thing, texted Piper into the void. By 7:30 p.m., I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at that unopened bottle of whiskey and wondering if there had been some kind of accident. I called the local hospital, nothing. Called Willow's sister Lindsay, no answer. Called Willow's parents, no response. The rational part of my brain kept insisting there had to be an explanation, some emergency that required everyone to disappear simultaneously without a word. That's when I made the mistake of checking Instagram. Posted 3 hours earlier, while I was fixing someone else's broken water main on my birthday, was a photo that redefined the concept of betrayal. My entire family, Willow, Tomas, Piper, Otis, his wife Kinsley, and Lindsay, all grinning like lottery winners on a pristine white beach, cocktails in hand, luxury resort gleaming in the background. The caption, courtesy of my son, read, "Family vacation mode activated. You won't even notice we gone, LOL." I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 90 minutes, scrolling through an endless stream of photos that documented every moment of their betrayal. Group dinners at restaurants with white tablecloths and ocean views, places that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. Jet ski rentals with professional photography, poolside selfies that looked like magazine advertisements, sunset cocktails captured with the kind of careful composition that spoke of leisure and luxury. All of it time stamped and geotagged to show this hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment trip, but a carefully planned expedition that had been in the works for months. The metadata told the real story. The photos started appearing 2 days earlier, which meant they'd left while I was at work. Probably Tuesday morning after I'd gone to the office with no idea that my family was packing for a luxury vacation I'd never been invited to join. The geotags showed they were staying at a resort I'd never even heard of, the kind of place that probably charged more per night than I made in a week, funded by money that had somehow materialized from accounts I thought we shared transparently. The comments were even worse. Willow had replied to Tomas's caption with a laughing emoji, and so true. Lindsay added something about workaholic husbands not appreciating the finer things. Even Piper, who I'd always thought was more sensitive than the rest, was there in every photo, sunglasses on, living her best life while her father sat alone on his 50th birthday. That's when something crystallized in my mind, something that had been building for years but needed this moment of perfect clarity to fully form. I realized I'd been playing the role of the invisible provider, the human ATM, the guy who shows up with money and solutions but isn't interesting enough to include in the actual fun. For years, I'd felt guilty about working too much, missing some events, being tired on weekends. But sitting there, looking at photos of my family spending what I later learned was $8,600 on a vacation they didn't think I deserved to know about, I understood that my guilt had been misplaced. Instead of calling them, instead of texting angry messages, instead of doing what they probably expected me to do, have a meltdown, make demands, create drama, I did something that would prove far more devastating. I went methodical. First, I checked our bank accounts. Sure enough, $4,000 had been withdrawn from our joint savings last Friday, the exact amount I'd given Tomas for his apartment down payment just 2 weeks earlier. Coincidence seemed unlikely. Then I started digging deeper, following digital breadcrumbs through old social media posts, checking credit card statements, piecing together a financial picture that made my blood run cold. Hidden in Willow's email account was a credit card statement for a card I didn't even know existed. $133,000 in debt, built up over 3 years of designer clothes, spa days with Lindsay, and what she called household necessities that somehow always included $200 lunches and boutique shopping sprees. The recent charges from their resort were already approaching $6,000, and they'd only been there 2 days. I spent the rest of my birthday night creating a comprehensive financial audit of our 25-year marriage. Every contribution, every sacrifice, every time I'd said no to something I wanted so someone else could have what they needed. The numbers told a story that would have made a forensic accountant weep. 82% of our joint expenses came from my income. 94% of our retirement savings came from me. 100% of the kids' college funds came from me. What did Willow contribute? Looking at the data, most of her income went right back out for personal expenses, while I'd been covering the mortgage, utilities, insurance, kids' education, and somehow still finding money for family vacations we could barely afford and family crises that always seemed to require my immediate financial intervention. Around 2 a.m., I found a text thread between Willow and Lindsay from 2 weeks earlier that explained everything I needed to know about how my family really saw me. Should we even tell Norman about the trip? Willow had asked. Why bother? Lindsay replied. He'll just complain about the cost. True, LOL. Willow responded. It's not like he ever pays attention to anything but work anyway. He probably won't notice until the weekend, Lindsay added. If that soon, came Willow's final message. That conversation, hidden in plain sight on a device we supposedly shared in the spirit of marital transparency, was the moment I realized my marriage had been over for years. I just hadn't been informed. They didn't see me as a husband and father, they saw me as a resource to be managed, a problem to be worked around, a boring necessity that funded their real lives. While they were posting beach selfies, I was making decisions that would reshape everything. First, I called my bank and rerouted my upcoming paycheck to a new individual account. Second, I contacted my friend Cody, who'd survived a brutal divorce the year before, and asked for his lawyer's number. Third, I started methodically moving Willow's belongings to the guest bedroom, not out of spite, but out of clarity. If I was going to be treated like a roommate who paid all the bills, we might as well make the living arrangements official. Day 2 of their vacation brought more Instagram stories and more documentation for what I'd started thinking of as my case file. Tomas posted a video of himself doing karaoke with Otis, with the caption, "Dad would hate this lol." Apparently, even their fun was defined by what they imagined I wouldn't enjoy. Willow shared a photo of herself at a spa with the comment, "Heaven so nice to get away from real life for a while." Real life meaning me, the person who made their escape possible. By day 3, my radio silence had finally penetrated their resort bubble. The first text came at 9:44 p.m. exactly from Willow, "Norman, are you there?" Followed by increasingly frantic messages as hours passed without response. By 3:28 a.m., she'd graduated to, "Please just answer me, I'm freaking out." 47 messages total, across all platforms: texts, WhatsApp, Instagram DMs, even emails, each one more desperate than the last. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I documented everything, printed it all out, organized it in folders like I was preparing for the most important presentation of my life. Which, in a way, I was. The calls started coming next. Otis left a voicemail that began concerned and ended with him calling me childish, because apparently not responding to people who excluded you from their family vacation makes you immature. Lindsay sent a message telling me to grow up and handle things like an adult, which was rich coming from someone who'd encouraged my wife to hide a family trip from me. While they panicked at their luxury resort, I was busy dismantling the financial structure that had enabled their casual cruelty. I removed Willow as an authorized user on all my credit cards, changed my direct deposit information, and set up automatic payments for exactly 3 months of mortgage and utilities. After that, we'd either have new arrangements or separate lives. When they finally came home, cutting their vacation short because of their concern for me, I was ready. I'd installed new deadbolts not to lock them out permanently, but to make them ring the doorbell, to force them to face me before walking back into our home like nothing had happened. The moment they stood on the doorstep, sunburned and exhausted, trying to manufacture casual smiles while clutching a gift bag that clearly hadn't been part of their original packing, I knew I held all the cards. Willow started with explanations about how worried they'd been, how they'd called hospitals, how they'd cut their trip short. Then she pivoted to claiming the trip had been planned as a pre-birthday celebration, but things had gotten complicated. I let her talk. Let them all talk. Then I pulled out my phone, opened Instagram, and held up the screen showing Tomas's post. "He won't even notice we gone, lol." The silence that followed was worth every lonely hour I'd spent on my birthday. When Otis stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation like he always did, telling me this was ridiculous and they needed to come inside and talk like adults, I finally spoke. I told him he wasn't welcome in my house that day, that he could drop off the luggage and leave. The look on his face, the great Otis, accustomed to everyone dancing to his tune, being told no for probably the first time in his adult life, was almost worth the $8,600 they'd spent on their little family bonding adventure. After Otis and Kinsley left, I let the others inside, but the house felt different, smaller, tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. That's when I brought out my folders, laid everything on the kitchen table: the screenshots, the bank statements, the expense breakdowns, the hidden credit card debt, and asked them one simple question. When exactly did I become so worthless to this family? Willow tried to turn it around, claiming I was being dramatic, that it was just a vacation, that they'd planned to celebrate my birthday when they returned. I showed her the text thread with Lindsay, and watched her face drain of color as she realized her own words had convicted her. Tomas attempted to downplay his Instagram captions, saying they were just jokes that everyone exaggerates on social media. I showed him a compilation of his posts from the past year, all the little digs about me being absent, being boring, being typical dad. His excuses evaporated. Piper cried, but even through her tears, she let slip that the trip had been planned for months, that it was originally supposed to include me, until Otis convinced Willow it could be a family reset without my negative energy bringing everyone down. By 7 p.m., we'd reached the ugly truth they'd all been dancing around for years. They'd created a narrative about me: Norman, the boring provider; Norman, the absent father; Norman, the workaholic that made it easy to justify treating me like an obstacle to their happiness. They'd convinced themselves I wouldn't care about being excluded, wouldn't notice, wouldn't feel. And they weren't entirely wrong. I had let work become my identity. I had missed events for overtime. I had been quiet when I should have spoken up. But I was speaking up now, and the words carried the weight of 25 years of accumulated disappointment. I told them I'd moved most of my assets to separate accounts, that I'd pay the mortgage and utilities for exactly 3 months while Willow figured out her next steps, that I'd continue supporting Piper's education directly, but not through their discretionary spending fund, and that they had 3 months to either rebuild our marriage on completely new terms or prepare for divorce. Tomas stormed out, calling me unfair. Piper retreated to her room in tears. Willow sat at the table, staring at the evidence of her betrayal like someone who just learned that actions have consequences. Around midnight, she sent one final text. I never meant for any of this to happen. The trip was supposed to be your gift, some time alone to relax. We were going to surprise you with something special when we got back. I don't know how things got so twisted. I read it 3 times, marveling at her ability to rewrite reality, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. I typed back carefully. I have the receipts, Willow. All 47 of them, plus about 100 more you don't even know about yet. The time for lies is over. Then I turned off my phone and went to sleep in my own bed. Alone, but not lonely, there's a difference. The weeks that followed brought a cascade of consequences that I watched unfold with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a controlled experiment. Willow moved in with Lindsay temporarily, which solved several problems at once. Tomas stopped answering my texts completely, at least until his own financial reality caught up with him. 2 weeks after the confrontation, he showed up at my door at 8:30 a.m., unshowered and red-eyed, looking like someone who'd just discovered that adulting involves actual math. His new apartment, the one I'd helped fund, had hidden costs he hadn't calculated. Utilities, internet, groceries, all the invisible expenses that had magically appeared at home but cost real money in the real world. The vacation had been more expensive than he'd planned. He'd put excursions and drinks on his own credit card, assuming he could figure it out later. Later had arrived with compound interest and late fees. Part of me wanted to let him learn this lesson the hard way, but the father in me couldn't abandon him completely. Instead, I made him breakfast and taught him how to create a real budget spreadsheet, showing him exactly what things cost in the world I'd been silently managing while he posted about what a boomer his dad was. By lunchtime, he looked shell-shocked, not just from the financial reality check, but from seeing, maybe for the first time, what I actually did for this family beyond existing as a punchline for his social media jokes. He didn't apologize directly, but he did something that hit me harder than any words could have. He deleted all his social media apps right there at the kitchen table, saying he needed to get his head straight without the constant noise. Now he comes over every Sunday for what he calls adulting lessons. We cook dinner, go over his budget, talk about things that matter. It's not the relationship we had before, it's better. Piper navigated the family earthquake with more grace than anyone had a right to expect from a 20-year-old caught between parents. She splits her time between Lindsay's place and mine, trying to maintain relationships with everyone while processing her own guilt about the vacation. I've made it clear she doesn't need to choose sides, that I'll always be her father regardless of what happens with Willow, that her future is secure. Willow's response has been a masterclass in damage control and narrative management. After the initial shock wore off, she shifted into full public relations mode, calling mutual friends to explain the situation, posting vague Facebook updates about healing from unexpected life changes that made it sound like I'd had some kind of breakdown. Lindsay became her unofficial spokesperson, telling anyone who'd listen that I was having a midlife crisis, that I was being financially abusive by separating our accounts, that the vacation was supposed to be a gift to me, not an exclusion. I haven't bothered countering any of it. The people who really know me see through it immediately, and the rest aren't worth my energy. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Willow finally came by for a real conversation, sitting at the kitchen counter where we'd shared breakfast for 20 years. She asked if I was really going through with this, if I was really willing to throw away our marriage over one mistake. I pulled out my phone, showed her the 47 messages again, and asked her to point to the one that acknowledged it was my birthday, the one that apologized for excluding me from a family vacation, the one that showed any real concern beyond fear of getting caught. She couldn't identify a single one. Then I asked her the question that had been burning in me for weeks. When did I become someone you could just write off? When did I become so invisible that you thought I wouldn't notice or care? What she said next changed everything. She admitted it wasn't sudden, that for years, maybe a decade, she'd felt like we were living parallel lives, that she'd tried to connect, but I was always working, always tired, always focused on providing rather than being present, that eventually she'd just adapted, built a life that didn't require my active participation. That conversation hurt because there was truth in it. I have prioritized providing over being present sometimes. I have missed events for work. I have been too tired for date nights after 60-hour weeks. But I also coached Tomas's Little League games, helped Piper with science projects, maintained our home, kept our cars running, and ensured the roof stayed over our heads. I showed up in all the ways I knew, how just not always in the ways Willow wanted. We talked for 4 hours that day. Real talk about expectations and resentments and the slow drift that happens when two people stop seeing each other clearly. At midnight, she asked if there was any chance for us, if I could forgive her for the trip, for the secret credit card, for the years of small betrayals that led to the big one. I told her honestly that forgiveness might be possible eventually, but forgetting wasn't. That trust, once broken, leaves scars even when it heals. She moved the last of her things to Lindsay's the next day, saying she needed time to figure out who she is without me, whatever that means. It's been a month now since my 50th birthday, a month since I came home to an empty house and discovered just how invisible I'd become to the people I thought were my world. Some days I'm angry, some days I'm tired, but most days I'm finding a strange new peace in being visible to myself for the first time in decades. I've started swimming at the community center 3 mornings a week, joined a hiking group that meets on Saturdays, even started going to happy hour with guys from work occasionally. Simple things, but they're mine, chosen by me, for me, without having to consider whether they fit into someone else's narrative about who I should be. Tomas comes by every Sunday now for our adulting lessons. We cook dinner together, go over his budget, talk about things that matter. It's not the relationship we had before, it's better, built on mutual respect rather than his assumption that I'd always be there regardless of how he treated me. Piper splits her time between both homes, navigating the new family geography with remarkable grace. We talk more honestly now about feelings and expectations and the difference between showing up physically and being emotionally present. Willow texts daily, alternating between nostalgic memories and practical questions about bills. I answer the practical ones and leave the rest on read, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I'm not interested in relitigating the past or enabling her fantasy that this was all a misunderstanding that we can laugh about someday. Yesterday, I finally changed my social media status from married to "it's complicated," because it is. Life is complicated, families are complicated, love and hurt and forgiveness are all complicated. But one thing isn't complicated anymore. I'm not invisible. Not to my son, who's learning what it means to be a man. Not to my daughter, who's seeing what self-respect looks like. Not to the friends I'm making, who know me as I am rather than as the role I played. And most importantly, not to myself. That visibility, that recognition of my own worth, that was worth the price of a beach vacation I never got to take. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free.